When we trace the story of humanity's fascination with cities lost beneath the sea, we must begin not with archaeology, but with myth. Long before divers descended into blue depths with oxygen tanks or sonar maps, our ancestors carried tales of great floods, drowned kingdoms, and civilizations swept away by angry seas. These stories were not limited to a single people or place. From Mesopotamia to the Pacific Islands, from the icy fjords of Scandinavia to the humid jungles of Central America, cultures separated by vast oceans somehow carried the same haunting memory, a time when water rose and erased entire worlds. The question has always lingered, were these just cautionary fables, or are they fractured memories of very real events buried under layers of time? The earliest written flood story we know comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh, inscribed onto clay tablets in ancient Mesopotamia. It tells of Utnapishtim, a man warned by the gods to build a great boat to survive a catastrophic deluge. His ark carried not only his family but seeds and animals, ensuring life would endure. Thousands of years later, another story, strikingly similar, would appear in the Hebrew Bible, Noah, guided by divine command, building his ark before the rains swallowed the world. Scholars argue endlessly about whether one tale inspired the other, or whether both arose from real floods in the fertile river valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates. Yet beyond literary parallels lies a larger question: why did so many cultures imagine the same fate? Across the world in India, the Matsya Purana recounts the god Vishnu taking the form of a fish to warn Manu, the first man, of a flood that would drown the earth. Manu is told to build a great ship, tether it to Vishnu's horn, and survive the chaos. This story, preserved in Sanskrit for thousands of years, mirrors the Mesopotamian and biblical accounts with uncanny precision. In ancient China, too, there is the legend of Yu the Great, a cultural hero who tamed endless floods by dredging channels and controlling waters that had once threatened to submerge entire kingdoms. And among the Mayans, in the sacred text known as the Popol Vuh, earlier worlds are said to have been destroyed in floods before the gods created the people of maize. In each case, the ocean or river was not just a setting, but a merciless force capable of erasing civilizations. When such parallels span continents, skeptics often argue they reflect human imagination rather than shared memory. Floods, after all, are universal: rivers rise, storms rage, and communities drown even in the modern age. Yet, something lingers in the sheer consistency of these tales. The details, the boats, the warnings, the survival of chosen families, and the disappearance of vast cities, suggest that oral traditions may have carried whispers of real events. Modern geology provides context that our ancestors could never fully articulate. Around 20,000 years ago, during the peak of the last ice age, sea levels were over 100 meters lower than today. Entire continental shelves were exposed, turning today's seabeds into fertile coastal plains. Then, between 12,000 and 7,000 years ago, as glaciers melted and oceans swelled, those lands vanished beneath rising seas. Millions of people who had settled along those coasts must have watched their homes disappear. Could their grief have been immortalized as myth? Archaeologists often approach these stories with caution, reluctant to blur the lines between folklore and evidence. Yet there are moments when myth and science appear to converge. In the Persian Gulf, for instance, geologists have suggested that a lush, low-lying plain once stretched far beyond today's coastline. Some call it the Gulf Oasis, a potential cradle of early civilizations now drowned beneath the sea. If such a land truly existed, then the stories of Mesopotamian floods may not have been fabrications, but fragmented memories of very real cataclysms. Similarly, around the Black Sea, researchers have argued for a deluge theory, proposing that when the Mediterranean breached natural barriers around 7,600 years ago, it poured violently into the basin, raising sea levels and swallowing early settlements. The people who fled that flood may have carried their trauma into legends passed down through generations. But why, then, did ancient storytellers emphasize the destruction of entire cities, not just farmland or villages? One explanation lies in the human tendency to magnify tragedy into moral lessons. Floods became not just accidents of nature, but punishments from gods for hubris, greed, or disobedience. Atlantis, which we will later examine, is perhaps the most famous example, a prosperous people drowned for their arrogance. Similarly, in the Bible, the flood purges humanity of corruption. The myths transform natural disasters into stories with purpose, ensuring they resonate across time. Yet within the metaphor lies a chilling truth: the destruction of coastal settlements was likely as swift and terrifying as the tales describe. Modern science has given these myths a new layer of credibility. Studies of ancient shorelines show sudden spikes in sea level rise, sometimes occurring over a single human lifetime. Imagine being part of a fishing village on a low-lying plain, only to watch the waters inch higher each year until one day, a storm or earthquake tips the balance and erases your world entirely. That memory would scar not just one generation, but dozens, seeping into folklore until it became myth. For us, these are stories; for them, they were survival manuals coded in sacred language. What makes the subject of flood myths truly haunting is the universality. Polynesian legends speak of lands swallowed by the sea. In the Pacific Northwest of America, indigenous peoples tell of massive floods and great canoes saving their ancestors. In Scandinavia, the Norse told of Ymir's blood flooding the earth, drowning all but a chosen few. These are not isolated threads, but a woven fabric stretching across humanity. When stories are that widespread, the line between imagination and shared memory blurs. They remind us that perhaps history is not entirely written in stone or ink, but whispered in the rhythm of waves that have washed away our past. And so, as we stand at the edge of myth and archaeology, we find ourselves confronting a possibility both thrilling and unsettling: that the world we know is only a fraction of the world that once was. The ruins of drowned cities, the fragments of lost coastlines, and the legends that survived in sacred texts may all be pieces of the same puzzle. The ocean has always been both giver and taker, offering abundance while demanding respect. For ancient peoples, to live near it was to risk annihilation, and so they remembered. They remembered in song, in scripture, in epic poetry, and in tales told around fires. And through those memories, they left us clues that we are only now beginning to decode. If myths are dismissed too easily, we risk losing their deeper message. If they are embraced too literally, we distort history with fantasy. The truth lies somewhere in the middle, in the recognition that stories are often shaped by kernels of reality. The great floods may not have been global apocalypses, but local disasters amplified by trauma into cosmic events. And yet, that amplification is precisely what allowed them to endure for thousands of years, guiding us back toward the buried truths of our own forgotten past. This is where the forbidden history begins, not in the depths of the sea, but in the depths of human memory, preserved as legend until we have the courage to look beneath the waves. When the subject of lost cities buried beneath the sea arises, no name echoes louder than Atlantis. More than a mere legend, Atlantis has become a symbol of forbidden history itself, an enigma that refuses to sink, despite centuries of skepticism. To understand Atlantis, we must travel back over 2,000 years, to the writings of Plato, the Athenian philosopher whose dialogues still shape how we think about the ancient world. For many, Plato is the father of philosophy; for others, he is the reluctant historian who left behind a clue so powerful it has haunted every generation since. The question is simple: was Atlantis real, or was it nothing more than allegory dressed as history? Plato first mentioned Atlantis around 360 BCE in two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. Within these texts, he describes a mighty island civilization lying beyond the Pillars of Heracleion, known today as the Strait of Gibraltar. Atlantis, according to Plato, was larger than Libya and Asia combined, blessed with fertile soil, advanced architecture, and powerful kings who ruled over a wealthy people. Their capital was described in almost hypnotic detail: concentric rings of land and water, crossed by bridges and canals, gleaming with temples, harbors, and palaces plated in precious metals. It was a city of staggering beauty, engineered with precision that seemed almost supernatural. And yet, in a single night and day of misfortune, the island was said to sink beneath the waves, lost forever to the sea. To Plato's audience, this was not simply a story of disaster. Atlantis represented the dangers of arrogance. Its people, once noble and virtuous, became corrupted by greed and ambition. In response, the gods punished them, erasing their civilization in a cataclysm so complete that only fragments of memory remained. The tale carried a moral lesson, a philosophical warning that no empire is immune to downfall. But here lies the enduring tension: was Plato using Atlantis as a cautionary allegory for Athens' own ambitions, or was he preserving fragments of an actual event passed down through Egyptian priests, as his dialogues claimed? For centuries, scholars leaned toward allegory. They argued that Plato's detailed description was merely a narrative device, a way of giving philosophical discussions a dramatic backdrop. And yet, others could not ignore the sheer specificity of his account: the names, the measurements, the geography. If it was fiction, it was constructed with extraordinary precision. Ancient historians such as Strabo and Pliny the Elder debated its authenticity, while others quietly entertained the possibility that somewhere in the Atlantic, or beyond, remnants of Atlantis might still rest. During the Renaissance, as Europe's age of exploration unfolded, the myth of Atlantis resurfaced with new vigor. Explorers sailing into the uncharted Atlantic saw themselves as rediscoverers of forgotten lands. When Columbus stumbled upon the Caribbean, whispers began that perhaps the islands he encountered were remnants of Plato's lost world. Mapmakers sketched strange continents, blending fact with myth, and visionaries speculated that the Americas themselves were the long-lost Atlantis. This merging of discovery and myth fueled colonial imaginations and gave Atlantis a renewed place in the human quest for origins. But the story did not end with Renaissance speculation. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Atlantis was reborn as a cornerstone of alternative history and occult thought. Writers like Ignatius Donnelly, with his 1882 book Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, argued passionately that all great civilizations, from Egypt to the Maya, were fragments of Atlantis diaspora. Donnelly claimed that survivors of the cataclysm spread knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and architecture across the globe, explaining the uncanny similarities between distant cultures. To skeptics, this was fantasy. To believers, it was forbidden truth suppressed by academic orthodoxy. Donnelly's ideas inspired waves of fascination, influencing everyone from theosophists to modern conspiracy theorists, and keeping Atlantis firmly in the spotlight. The 20th century added yet another layer. Edgar Cayce, the so-called sleeping prophet, claimed through trance visions that Atlantis had been a real place destroyed in stages, with survivors leaving behind advanced technology that still lies buried beneath the oceans. His prophecies suggested that Atlantis would one day rise again, igniting imaginations far beyond the world of archaeology. Meanwhile, in popular culture, Atlantis became a canvas for endless speculation, from pulp novels and comic books to blockbuster films and documentaries. The image of a sunken utopia filled with mystery has proven irresistible. Yet behind the allure of myth lies a darker truth: the story of Atlantis has also been twisted to justify ideologies. In the early 20th century, some fringe thinkers linked Atlantis to theories of a superior ancient race, feeding into racial myths that distorted history for political ends. These appropriations remind us that forbidden history can be manipulated, and that legends, however alluring, carry dangerous power when wielded carelessly. Still, archaeology has uncovered discoveries that invite us to wonder whether Plato's story had kernels of truth. Submerged cities like Pavlopetri in Greece, Heracleion in Egypt, and even the Yonaguni structures in Japan show us that advanced settlements were indeed swallowed by the sea. They are not Atlantis, but they prove the possibility that Plato's account may not have been pure invention. The idea of a mighty coastal civilization erased by floods aligns with geological events of the late Ice Age, when sea levels surged and reshaped coastlines worldwide. Perhaps Atlantis was not a single place, but a composite memory of many drowned cities, preserved in Plato's words as one grand narrative. What makes Atlantis endure is not the certainty of its existence, but the mystery. Every generation projects its hopes and fears onto it. To some, it is a cautionary tale of hubris, to others, a promise that a golden age of wisdom once existed and may be rediscovered. It straddles the line between philosophy and history, between allegory and archaeology, refusing to resolve itself. And maybe that is its greatest power. By remaining elusive, Atlantis compels us to keep searching, not only in the depths of the ocean, but in the depths of our imagination. As we move forward in our exploration of forbidden history, Atlantis serves as both a beacon and a warning. It reminds us of the fragility of civilizations, the danger of arrogance, and the possibility that entire chapters of human history lie hidden beneath the waves. Whether it was allegory, memory, or a mixture of both, the story of Atlantis continues to ask a question that resonates across time: how much of our past have we truly forgotten, and how much remains waiting, silently, beneath the sea? If the Atlantic world gave birth to the legend of Atlantis, the Indian Ocean offers something even more unsettling: stories of drowned kingdoms that rest not in allegory but in fragments of stone and whispered memory. Here, beneath warm tropical waters, divers have stumbled upon ruins that look suspiciously like temples, walls, and avenues, structures that should not exist where they are, structures that seem older than any empire we know. In this corner of the world, myths of submerged lands are not just tales, they are identities woven into culture. And the deeper one looks, the more one wonders: are these the real forbidden histories, brushed aside by mainstream academia because they do not fit comfortably into the timeline of civilization? One of the most haunting discoveries lies in the Gulf of Khambhat, off the coast of Gujarat, India. In the early 2000s, sonar scans revealed vast geometric patterns on the seabed, stretching for miles. Divers reported retrieving artifacts, pottery shards, stone tools, and even what looked like sections of walls. If genuine, these findings would suggest a settlement tens of thousands of years old, far older than the Indus Valley civilization, which mainstream history recognizes as one of South Asia's earliest urban cultures. Some researchers claimed radiocarbon dating of materials pointed to dates around 9,000 years ago, aligning suspiciously with the end of the last ice age, when sea levels rose dramatically. Critics, however, quickly countered that the so-called ruins were natural formations, the artifacts scattered debris from rivers rather than the remnants of a city. The debate flared hot, then quietly cooled, leaving behind only questions. Why did investigations seem to stall? Why were finds not pursued more aggressively? Was it skepticism, or was it something closer to reluctance, the unwillingness to rewrite the entire narrative of human history? Local traditions add layers of intrigue. In Tamil culture, there are legends of Kumari Kandam, a vast southern land said to have sunk beneath the waves, once home to a glorious Tamil civilization that predated all others. For centuries, poets and storytellers spoke of a continent stretching into the Indian Ocean, rich in culture and wisdom, swallowed by the sea after a great cataclysm. Modern scholars dismiss this as nationalist myth-making, yet the persistence of the story is striking. Could it be a distant echo of real coastlines drowned by post-Ice Age flooding? The myth of Kumari Kandam connects seamlessly with a broader legend known across colonial and esoteric writings, Lemuria. In the 19th century, European naturalists proposed the existence of a lost continent in the Indian Ocean to explain how lemurs could be found in both Madagascar and India. Later, occultists transformed Lemuria into a cradle of ancient wisdom, a civilization older than Atlantis itself, whose people vanished into the sea. Science eventually solved the lemur puzzle with plate tectonics, but the legend of Lemuria refused to die, absorbed into the lore of hidden civilizations and forbidden archaeology. Travel further south to Sri Lanka, and the whispers become even more concrete. Off the coast of Mannar, fishermen have spoken for generations of submerged ruins. Offshore surveys have revealed intriguing anomalies, including the outlines of what some believe to be ancient man-made structures. One story connects these ruins to the legendary city of Ravana from the Indian epic, the Ramayana. In the epic, Ravana was a powerful king whose golden capital was destroyed in a cosmic war. Could the epic be more than allegory? Could it be a memory of real cities now lying silent beneath the Indian Ocean? When we pull the lens back, the Indian Ocean basin reveals itself as one of the most unstable regions in the world. Tectonic shifts, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis have reshaped coastlines repeatedly. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, which devastated communities from Indonesia to East Africa, provided a chilling modern glimpse of how entire coastlines can be swallowed overnight. In India and Sri Lanka, the tsunami's retreating waters revealed previously hidden temple foundations and ancient walls long thought lost. In Thailand, villagers spoke of seeing old foundations exposed beneath the waves. If such glimpses could emerge in a single day, what else lies buried beneath centuries of tides? It is here that the line between myth and memory blurs most dangerously. The Indian Ocean civilizations, whether real or imagined, challenged the narrative that complex societies only began 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia and Egypt. If ruins in the Gulf of Kumbat are genuine, they point to urbanized cultures at least 3,000 or 4,000 years older, existing before mainstream archaeology says they should. That possibility unsettles not just historians, but the entire framework of human progress. To accept it would mean rewriting textbooks, reconsidering how and where humanity first organized itself, and admitting that countless chapters of our past may be missing. It would also mean acknowledging that rising seas, not just wars or famines, may have erased the first great experiments in civilization. Why, then, is this history considered forbidden? Partly because evidence is murky, scattered, and often drowned under miles of ocean. But also because institutions resist upheaval. Archaeology, like all fields, is bound by reputations, funding, and the fragile architecture of consensus. To embrace the possibility of civilizations older than Sumer and Egypt risks accusations of pseudoscience. Yet to ignore the tantalizing evidence leaves us blind to the mysteries that lie beneath the surface. Divers, independent researchers, and even local fishermen often tell stories of discoveries quietly dismissed, artifacts quietly archived, and ruins quietly labeled as natural. The result is a silence as heavy as the waters themselves. Still, the Indian Ocean continues to whisper. Off the coast of Mauritius, researchers have uncovered fragments of ancient continental crust buried under volcanic rock, a hint that perhaps the region did once host landmasses long since swallowed. In Madagascar, oral traditions recall floods that consumed villages, while megalithic ruins dot landscapes that still puzzle archaeologists. Across the Maldives, reef formations resemble walls and harbors, prompting speculation about ancient engineering. Each fragment is ambiguous, but together they form a mosaic too compelling to ignore. For now, the story of the Indian Ocean's drowned civilizations remains suspended between myth and science, belief and denial. But one truth is undeniable: this was a region teeming with human activity, trade, and culture for thousands of years, perched on coastlines that were never as stable as they seemed. The ocean has always been a fickle neighbor, offering prosperity one day and destruction the next. The people of these lands remembered that, encoding it into myths of lost continents, sunken empires, and divine punishments. Whether those stories were symbolic or historical, they endure because they speak to a deeper truth, that entire worlds can vanish, leaving behind only ruins and rumors. As we drift away from the Indian Ocean, we carry with us the sense of what forbidden history truly feels like. Not a clean-cut mystery with answers, but a blurred outline glimpsed through silt and saltwater. A whisper of civilizations erased before history began, whose only survivors were myths carried on the tongues of poets, priests, and fishermen. To dismiss them outright is to underestimate the ocean's power to hide. To believe them blindly is to surrender reason. But to walk the line between, to investigate the possibility that myths may be memories, is to peer directly into the abyss of the unknown. And it is there, in that abyss, that the truth of forbidden history waits. When most people imagine the Mediterranean Sea, they think of turquoise waters, sunny coasts, and ancient ruins perched safely on cliffs. But beneath its surface lies another history, one hidden in silence and shadow. Here, under layers of silt and sand, lie entire cities swallowed by the waves, their temples, streets, and marketplaces still eerily intact. The Mediterranean is not just the cradle of civilization, it is also its graveyard, where earthquakes, rising seas, and shifting sands erased entire chapters of human life. Unlike myths of Atlantis or Lemuria, many of these places have been found, mapped, and explored, yet their stories are rarely told in full. They remind us that human history is not only written on land but etched beneath the tides. Perhaps the most evocative of these cities is Pavlopetri, lying off the coast of southern Greece. Discovered in 1967 and later mapped with advanced sonar, Pavlopetri is estimated to be at least 5,000 years old, dating back to the Bronze Age. What makes it extraordinary is not simply its age but its preservation. Streets, houses, courtyards, and even larger public buildings remain visible beneath just a few meters of water. Divers have explored an entire urban landscape frozen in time, a place where people once lived, traded, and worshipped. Pavlopetri's existence proves something many had suspected but could not prove, that ancient people built thriving coastal cities long before the written word, and those cities did not vanish because they were primitive but because the sea claimed them. To swim through Pavlopetri is to wander a ghost town where fish dart through doorways once used by human families. If Pavlopetri is a window into early Greek life, then the sunken city of Heracleion, near modern-day Alexandria in Egypt, is a reminder of the grandeur and fragility of great empires. Once a bustling port at the mouth of the Nile, Heracleion served as the gateway to Egypt for centuries, its harbors welcoming merchants, pilgrims, and envoys from across the Mediterranean. In 2000, French archaeologist Frank Gaudio and his team rediscovered the city after it had lain hidden for more than 1,000 years. What they found was breathtaking: colossal statues toppled onto the seabed, temple complexes dedicated to Egyptian gods, rows of sphinxes, and shipwrecks preserved in the mud. Ancient coins and jewelry gleamed among broken columns, as if the city had been abandoned only yesterday. Heracleion's sudden disappearance around the 2nd century BCE remains a mystery. Earthquakes, soil liquefaction, and tidal surges are all suspected, but the result was the same: an entire city swallowed whole, its existence erased from history until divers rediscovered it. For centuries, Heracleion was known only in passing references in ancient texts. Many scholars doubted it ever existed. Today, it lies silent beneath the waves, a forbidden reminder that history can vanish, not just from sight, but from memory. Italy, too, hides its own drowned world. Just off the Bay of Naples lies the sunken city of Baiae, once a decadent resort for the Roman elite. Known in antiquity as a place of luxury and excess, Baiae was the playground of emperors and senators, filled with lavish villas, bathhouses, and ornate mosaics. But volcanic activity caused the land to sink gradually, submerging entire neighborhoods. Today, divers can glide over intricate mosaics still embedded in villa floors, statues still standing in courtyards, and streets that echo with the decadence of Rome's golden age. What is striking about Baiae is not just its preservation but its atmosphere: an underwater Pompeii, but instead of being frozen in volcanic ash, it is slowly dissolving into the sea. The mosaics ripple in the shifting light, columns tilt at eerie angles, and statues appear ghostly beneath the water. Here, luxury became ruin, and the pleasure capital of the Roman Empire became one of its most haunting reminders. Beyond these well-documented sites, the Mediterranean holds countless lesser-known ruins. Off the coast of Israel, archaeologists have explored Atlit Yam, a Neolithic village now submerged under 10 meters of water. Dating back to around 7000 BCE, Atlit Yam contains stone houses, wells, and even human skeletons, one of which shows signs of tuberculosis, the earliest known case of the disease. Nearby, a circle of upright stone suggests ritual practices, a prehistoric Stonehenge of the sea. Atlit Yam disappeared when rising seas at the end of the Ice Age swallowed the Levantine coast. Its rediscovery is a sobering reminder that even the earliest farmers and fishermen built communities near the sea, and those communities were as vulnerable as any modern city to the whims of water. What makes these Mediterranean cities especially compelling is how ordinary they were. Unlike Atlantis, with its golden palaces and cosmic punishments, Pavlopetri, Heracleion, Baiae, and Atlantis were not legends. They were towns and ports, filled with merchants, priests, children, and soldiers. Their ruins tell stories not of gods but of human ambition, prosperity, and sudden tragedy. When the seas rose or the earth shifted, there was no divine intervention, only nature's indifference. And yet, the result feels mythic, whole cities vanishing, leaving behind silence. To walk their submerged streets today is to confront the uncanny, the feeling of seeing human achievement reduced to ghostly outlines. These were not forgotten because they were insignificant, they were forgotten because the sea is the most perfect eraser. The forbidden quality of these histories lies not in their existence, after all, they are documented, but in how little we are told about them. They rarely appear in textbooks or popular retellings of ancient history. Instead, we are taught about the glories of Athens and Rome, the pyramids of Egypt, and the mysteries of Mesopotamia, while the equally haunting stories beneath the Mediterranean waves are relegated to the margins. Perhaps it is because they complicate the tidy image of progress, reminding us that the sea has always been capable of undoing even the mightiest achievements. Perhaps it is because they make us uneasy, forcing us to imagine our own cities, New York, Alexandria, Istanbul, lying in ruins under future waters. Whatever the reason, the Mediterranean's sunken worlds remain underexposed, their stories half-told. As the camera of history pans away from these ruins, we are left with a sense of awe and unease. The Mediterranean is often portrayed as calm and timeless, but beneath its surface lies proof that nothing is eternal. Empires crumble, cities drown, and only fragments survive, waiting centuries for rediscovery. Pavla Petri shows us the lives of Bronze Age villagers, Heracleion the grandeur of Egypt's gateways, Baiae the decadence of Rome, and Atlantis the resilience of prehistoric farmers. Together, they tell a single story, that the sea is not just a backdrop to history but a central player, capable of erasing civilizations in an instant. These ruins whisper of fragility, hubris, and the eternal tension between human ambition and natural power. They remind us that even the most advanced cultures are only ever tenants on the edge of a restless ocean. Far from the familiar coasts of Europe and Asia, another set of mysteries waits beneath the warm turquoise waters of the Caribbean. These seas, often pictured as paradises of sun, rum, and coral reefs, also conceal stories of lost structures, strange formations, and legends of vanished civilizations. Unlike the Mediterranean, where ruins are documented by archaeologists, the Caribbean's underwater enigmas blur the line between science and speculation. Yet, these stories endure because they feed on something primal, the possibility that fragments of forgotten worlds lie just below the waves, waiting for divers brave enough to descend into their silence. One of the most persistent mysteries is the Bimini Road, off the coast of the Bahamas. In 1968, divers stumbled upon an arrangement of massive limestone blocks stretching nearly half a kilometer along the seabed. The stones are rectangular, some measuring several meters across, fitted together in a way that looked uncannily like a paved road or the foundation of a wall. The discovery electrified alternative historians. Could this be a surviving fragment of Atlantis? Was this the proof that Plato's story pointed not to the Mediterranean, but to the Caribbean? Writers and explorers rushed to Bimini, convinced that they had found the cornerstone of a forgotten civilization. Even psychic Edgar Cayce, decades before the discovery, had prophesied that Atlantis will rise near Bimini. To his followers, the coincidence was too staggering to ignore. Mainstream science, however, offered a simpler explanation: the blocks were a natural geological formation. The region's limestone, they argued, fractures naturally into rectangular slabs through a process called beachrock formation. Over time, these slabs broke apart and settled on the seafloor in a way that only appeared man-made. To geologists, Bimini Road was no more mysterious than cracked pavement after an earthquake. But skeptics of the official explanation remain unconvinced. They argue that the precision of the blocks, the way they are arranged in long straight lines, and the occasional appearance of secondary joints look more like engineering than geology. To swim along Bimini Road is to be caught between two competing truths: either you are looking at nothing more than rock shaped by time, or you are gliding above the remains of a forgotten avenue that once bustled with life. The Caribbean holds more than just the Bimini anomaly. Off the coast of Cuba, in the early 2000s, a Canadian research team scanning the seabed reported detecting massive structures nearly 600 meters below the surface. Sonar images suggested pyramids, roads, and geometric patterns, far larger than anything expected in the region. The announcement made headlines, sparking comparisons to lost cities and civilizations. Some speculated this could be an antediluvian culture, swallowed when sea levels rose after the last ice age. Yet, despite the sensational early reports, little follow-up was ever released. Official investigations went silent, and the so-called Cuban underwater city faded into obscurity, living on only in whispers and grainy sonar images. For many, the silence was suspicious. Why would a discovery of such potential importance vanish from public discussion? Was it skepticism, lack of funding, or the deliberate shelving of evidence that might rewrite history? These discoveries gain power not just from their physical form but from the legends woven into the region. The Caribbean has long been associated with mysteries of the sea, none greater than the Bermuda Triangle. Stretching roughly between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, the triangle has been blamed for shipwrecks, aircraft disappearances, and strange navigational anomalies. Skeptics dismiss these stories as exaggerations, pointing to storms, human error, and natural magnetic variations. Yet, in popular imagination, the Bermuda Triangle is a place where normal rules break down, where time bends, and where remnants of lost civilizations might still exert their influence. Linking the triangle to Atlantis became almost inevitable in the 20th century, with writers claiming that advanced technologies left behind by the Atlanteans were interfering with ships and planes. The myth blurred into modern folklore, ensuring that the Caribbean was forever branded a place where history and mystery overlap. But behind the sensationalism lies a sobering reality: the Caribbean has always been vulnerable to the ocean's wrath. Hurricanes, tsunamis, and tectonic activity have repeatedly reshaped coastlines, swallowing islands and settlements. Indigenous peoples of the region carried stories of floods and vanished lands, just as other cultures around the world did. To them, the sea was both provider and destroyer, generous in fish and trade routes but merciless when it rose without warning. When modern divers stumble across strange stone formations or sonar anomalies, perhaps they are not finding Atlantis at all, but remnants of smaller, local cultures that once thrived on coasts now drowned. In this light, the myths become more than fantasy, they become memories encoded in legend, distorted by centuries, but rooted in real events of loss. The forbidden quality of the Caribbean's mysteries lies in the tension between evidence and dismissal. To the academic establishment, the Bimini Road and Cuba anomalies are geological curiosities, nothing more. Yet to believers, they are tantalizing pieces of a puzzle deliberately ignored. What makes these places so powerful is the uncertainty. They are neither fully explained nor definitively debunked, suspended in a gray space where imagination fills the gaps. It is in that space that legends grow, attracting divers, writers, filmmakers, and dreamers. Each wave of discovery revives the same hope, that perhaps the sea has not erased everything, that perhaps one day the lost world beneath the Caribbean will reveal itself fully. As we leave the Caribbean, what lingers is not just the allure of Atlantis or the Bermuda Triangle, but the sense of possibility. These waters conceal secrets we cannot yet name, places that may be natural or may be human, ruins or rock formations, forgotten civilizations or tricks of geology. In their uncertainty, they embody the essence of forbidden history, the knowledge that we do not know, and perhaps do not want to know, because the answers could change everything we believe about the past. The turquoise waves glisten on the surface, but below lies silence, heavy and unresolved, daring us to keep searching. Across the vast expanse of the Pacific and the edges of Asia lie some of the most perplexing underwater mysteries ever discovered. These are not vague legends scribbled on ancient scrolls, but solid stone rising from the seabed, monuments, platforms, and entire complexes that should not exist where they are. Here, amid shifting tides and volcanic ridges, lies a collection of drowned kingdoms that defy simple explanation. For centuries, local people have told stories of spirits and dragons, of vanished empires and forbidden cities. Only in recent decades have divers and archaeologists begun to glimpse the truth. Asia's coasts hide some of the most haunting ruins on Earth, and perhaps some of the most dangerous challenges to our understanding of human history. One of the most debated sites in the world is the Yonaguni Monument, off the coast of Okinawa, Japan. Discovered by a diver in 1986, it appears at first glance like a massive stone structure carved with precision. Enormous terraces, steps, and angular formations jut out of the seabed, resembling pyramids, platforms, and ceremonial plazas. Some sections even look like pathways and staircases, as if they were designed for human use. The sheer size is staggering, over 150 meters long and 25 meters high, with geometric lines that look anything but natural. Divers who descend into its depths describe the sensation of standing before a sunken temple, the seabed transformed into an otherworldly cityscape. But the debate surrounding Yonaguni is fierce. Some geologists insist the structures are natural formations, the result of sandstone fracturing along tectonic lines. To them, what looks like steps and walls is nothing more than erosion shaped by ocean currents and earthquakes. Yet others argue that the precision is too perfect, the angles too deliberate, and the scale too vast to be explained by chance. Independent researchers claim to see carvings resembling animals and symbols etched into the stone, as if remnants of a forgotten language. If man-made, Yonaguni could date back to 10,000 years ago, an era when, according to mainstream history, humans in Japan were still hunter-gatherers, far from building megalithic architecture. To accept Yonaguni as artificial would be to rewrite the timeline of civilization entirely. Local folklore only deepens the mystery. Stories from Okinawan tradition speak of ancient kingdoms swallowed by the sea, of gods punishing humans for pride, and of dragon kings ruling from beneath the waves. Some suggest the site may be linked to Mu, the mythical Pacific continent proposed by 19th-century writers as a rival to Atlantis. Like Atlantis, Mu was said to be a thriving civilization erased by catastrophic floods, leaving only scattered islands as remnants. To skeptics, this is fantasy. To believers, it is oral memory transformed into myth, just as flood stories elsewhere preserved echoes of real cataclysms. Yonaguni, whether natural or not, has become the physical anchor of these stories, a reminder that sometimes myth and stone cannot be easily separated. Further east, in the remote islands of Micronesia, lies another enigma, Nan Madol. Known as the Venice of the Pacific, Nan Madol is a sprawling complex of artificial islets, canals, and megalithic structures built on a coral reef near Pohnpei. The site stretches across 200 acres, with over 90 islets constructed from massive basalt columns, some weighing 50 tons each. The engineering feat is astonishing. Giant stone logs stacked in crisscrossing patterns, forming walls up to 25 feet high, enclosing temples, tombs, and dwellings. For centuries, Nan Madol was the ceremonial and political heart of the Saudeleur dynasty, which ruled the island until about the 1600s. But how such a monumental complex was built with no metal tools, no wheels, and limited resources remains one of archaeology's greatest puzzles. Local legends attribute Nan Madol's construction to sorcery. Oral traditions claim two brothers, Olasopa and Olasipa, arrived from across the sea, bringing with them knowledge of magic that allowed them to levitate stones into place. Others speak of the ruins being haunted, warning that the site is cursed and dangerous to visit after dark. Western explorers who stumbled upon Nan Madol in the 19th century called it an Atlantis of the Pacific, captivated by its eerie beauty and the sense of abandonment that clings to its walls. Even today, walking through Nan Madol is like stepping into another world. Jungle roots wrap around basalt towers, canals glisten under the sun, and silence hangs heavy, broken only by the lapping of tides. The mystery of Nan Madol is compounded by its vulnerability. Rising sea levels threaten to reclaim parts of the city, just as they may have submerged earlier settlements along the Pohnpei coast. Archaeologists speculate that Nan Madol may not stand alone, but could be the last surviving fragment of a much larger complex, much of it now beneath the sea. If true, then even here, in this remote corner of the Pacific, the ocean has been swallowing civilizations long before written history began. Asia's drowned kingdoms are not limited to Yonaguni and Nan Madol. Across Indonesia, divers have discovered submerged temple sites, particularly around Java and Bali, where earthquakes and volcanic eruptions repeatedly reshaped the land. In southern India and Sri Lanka, stories of submerged palaces and temples echo those found in the Indian Ocean basin, suggesting entire cultural landscapes were lost to rising tides. Along China's coast, ancient records speak of vanished cities swallowed during tsunamis and storms, their ruins rumored to lie beneath muddy estuaries. In each case, myth and archaeology overlap, pointing to a truth that feels both obvious and unsettling. Asia's coasts have always been vulnerable, and civilizations rose and fell with the rhythms of the sea. What unites these sites is not just their physical mystery, but the reluctance of mainstream narratives to embrace them fully. To classify Yonaguni as natural is to preserve the neat timeline of civilization. To accept it as artificial is to admit that humans were building monumental structures thousands of years earlier than we believe. To treat Nan Madol as merely an island curiosity is to overlook its staggering feat of engineering, one that rivals the great cities of the Old World yet remains largely unknown outside the Pacific. In both cases, the forbidden element lies not in the ruins themselves, but in what they suggest, that the story of humanity may be far older, and far stranger, than we dare to accept. As the camera drifts away from these drowned kingdoms, a sense of unease lingers. The Pacific and Asian coasts whisper the same warnings as the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, that the sea remembers even when we forget, that empires can vanish without leaving a trace, and that myths often point to truths hidden in plain sight. Whether natural formations shaped by time, or remnants of civilizations erased by rising seas, the ruins of Yonaguni and Nan Madol remind us of one inescapable fact: the ocean does not care about the boundaries of history. It swallows, it conceals, and it waits. And when we finally look beneath the waves, we may find not just lost stones, but the realization that we, too, are standing on borrowed ground. High in the Andes, where the air is thin and the waters of Lake Titicaca shimmer like a mirror to the sky, lies one of South America's most haunting enigmas. Beneath its surface, divers have discovered stone structures, terraces, and fragments of walls that suggest an ancient world once thrived here. The lake, straddling the border of Bolivia and Peru, has always held sacred significance to the people of the region. In Inca mythology, it was from Lake Titicaca that the first humans emerged, guided by the sun god to establish civilization. But could the myths hold more than symbolic truth? Could the lake be concealing the ruins of a drowned city, a memory of a civilization erased by rising waters or violent shifts of the earth? Archaeological expeditions in the late 20th century revealed stone temples submerged in the lake, including what appeared to be a grand structure with a central platform. Divers found stone walls and staircases encrusted with algae, eerily preserved by the cold waters. Radiocarbon dating suggested some of these ruins could predate the Inca by centuries, perhaps belonging to the earlier Tiwanaku culture, known for its monumental architecture and mysterious stone carvings. The Tiwanaku people, who flourished near the lake around 500 to 1000 CE, built one of the most enigmatic cities in the Americas, with their massive gateway of the sun and precisely carved stone blocks that still puzzle engineers today. If fragments of their world lie beneath Titicaca, then perhaps the myths of origins from the lake are more literal than metaphorical. They were not tales of creation, but memories of emergence from the waters after catastrophe. The lake is not the only place where South America whispers of lost worlds. Across the Amazon basin, stories persist of entire cities swallowed by time and jungle, some perhaps drowned by shifting rivers and floods. For centuries, explorers dismissed indigenous accounts of these lost cities as fantasy. Early European adventurers, lured by the dream of El Dorado, sought a golden city hidden in the forests, only to return empty-handed or not at all. The Amazon was cast as an impenetrable wilderness, inhospitable to complex societies. Yet modern archaeology has begun to overturn this view. Using LiDAR, researchers have revealed vast networks of geometric earthworks, causeways, and plazas hidden beneath the canopy, evidence that the Amazon once supported large, organized societies. Some of these earthworks lie near floodplains, where seasonal inundation would have erased settlements. The possibility arises that entire urban centers may now be buried not only under trees, but beneath waters that have shifted course countless times over the millennia. The myths of El Dorado, long reduced to tales of Spanish greed, may also preserve kernels of memory. Indigenous groups spoke of shining cities and rulers who coated themselves in gold dust, then bathed in sacred lakes. Spanish chroniclers exaggerated these accounts, fueling expeditions that ended in starvation and death. But beneath the exaggeration lies a pattern, stories of wealth concentrated in cities that may have existed but were destroyed, abandoned, or submerged. The rivers of the Amazon are unpredictable, carving new courses with each flood. A thriving settlement one year could be underwater the next. What if the Golden City was not a place overflowing with treasure, but a city swallowed by water, its riches carried downstream, feeding the legend? Coastal South America offers its own echoes of lost worlds. Off the coast of Venezuela and the Caribbean fringes of Colombia, local traditions speak of islands and towns that sank beneath the sea, leaving behind only ghostly outlines visible on calm days. In Peru, stories of sunken temples along the Pacific coast intertwine with tsunamis and earthquakes, disasters well documented in historical times. Each story carries the same haunting rhythm, flourishing communities undone by water, their memory preserved in myth, their ruins concealed from view. What makes South America's submerged history especially poignant is the resilience of indigenous memory. Unlike in Europe, where myths of Atlantis became allegories debated by philosophers, here the stories remain deeply tied to identity. For the Aymara and Quechua, Lake Titicaca is not just a lake but a birthplace, a sacred womb. For Amazonian tribes, stories of vanished cities are not fairy tales but ancestral memory. Yet when Europeans arrived, these voices were silenced, dismissed as superstition. The forbidden quality of these histories lies in that silencing, the systematic refusal to consider indigenous narratives as records of real events. Only now, with technology uncovering traces of hidden cities, are we beginning to realize that perhaps the stories were never just stories. The ruins beneath Lake Titicaca and the earthworks of the Amazon point toward a humbling truth: civilizations do not need to leave behind towering pyramids to be significant. They can flourish, adapt, and vanish, leaving behind only fragments, myths, and questions. The arrogance of dismissing indigenous knowledge as legend has cost us centuries of understanding. The forbidden history is not just what lies beneath the water, but what lies beneath our own assumptions, an unwillingness to see that people everywhere, in every corner of the world, were capable of building and remembering. The camera lingers on the still waters of Lake Titicaca, its surface glinting like liquid silver in the high-altitude sun. Beneath that surface lie ruins that defy easy explanation, temples to forgotten gods, staircases leading nowhere, stones cut and placed by hands whose names are lost. The people of the Andes remember them in myths of origins, while the Amazon remembers in stories of vanished cities and golden rulers. To listen to those voices is to admit that history is not confined to what is written in books or carved on monuments. It is also hidden beneath water, concealed by forest, and carried in stories dismissed for too long. As we drift away from South America's shores, we are left with a feeling both haunting and familiar, the sense that entire civilizations have been erased not because they were unworthy, but because nature is merciless and memory fragile. The waters of Lake Titicaca, the shifting rivers of the Amazon, and the storms of the Pacific all serve as reminders. The sea, the lake, the river, they are not boundaries of history but its erasers. And yet, within myths of El Dorado, in the sacred origins of the Inca, and in the submerged ruins divers still uncover, fragments of the forbidden past continue to surface, daring us to look closer. Every age of discovery brings with it not only revelations, but also silences. For every celebrated find placed in museums and textbooks, there are stories whispered in the margins, objects that vanish, sites that are dismissed, and evidence that seems to challenge the very foundations of history. This is the domain often called forbidden archaeology, the realm where discoveries either contradict accepted timelines or are too inconvenient to fit into the narrative we have been taught. It is not always conspiracy that drives these silences, sometimes it is skepticism, sometimes politics, and sometimes the human reluctance to embrace the unknown. Yet, as divers, explorers, and even ordinary fishermen will tell you, the sea has offered glimpses of a past that seems older, stranger, and more advanced than we are prepared to acknowledge. One of the most persistent accusations within forbidden archaeology is that underwater discoveries are quietly archived and forgotten. Divers who have retrieved anomalous artifacts from the seabed often speak of their finds disappearing into academic or government vaults, never to be seen again. A stone carving here, a fragment of pottery there, items that suggest human presence in places long thought uninhabited. In coastal India, fishermen reported pulling up intricately carved stones from nets near submerged ruins. Some ended up in local temples, displayed as curiosities, while others were confiscated by officials for study. The official line often labeled them as natural formations or out-of-context finds. To the fishermen, however, these were remnants of cities their ancestors had always spoken about. What mattered to them was not scientific approval, but the confirmation that their stories were true. Accounts of cover-ups are not limited to South Asia. In the Mediterranean, early divers exploring the ruins of Heracleion and other submerged ports have described seeing statues and artifacts that never made it into published reports. Some claim that fragile relics were quietly collected, logged, and then hidden away due to fear of sensationalism or misinterpretation. Whether such claims are exaggerated or not, they add to the aura of forbidden knowledge, the sense that the most tantalizing pieces of the puzzle are deliberately kept out of sight. Why would such suppression occur? One reason is simple: history is not just a record of the past, but a structure of authority in the present. Archaeologists, museums, and universities depend on reputations and funding. If a discovery threatens to upend long-accepted timelines, for example, evidence of advanced urban cultures thousands of years before Mesopotamia, it risks destabilizing careers and institutions. Scholars may prefer to err on the side of caution, dismissing anomalous finds rather than staking their reputations on radical claims. In doing so, they protect the framework of history but also risk discarding fragments of truth. Politics plays a role as well. Nations stake their identities on archaeological heritage. A discovery suggesting that an advanced civilization once flourished in a different region can ignite nationalist tensions. In the case of Kumari Kandam, the lost Tamil land said to be swallowed by the sea, claims of its existence became entangled with regional pride. Some scholars dismissed the idea outright, not necessarily because the evidence was lacking, but because acknowledging it carried political implications. Similarly, in Egypt, some alternative historians have argued that acknowledgement of foreign influence on ancient architecture is resisted because it challenges national pride in Egypt's independent achievements. Whether one agrees with such claims or not, the reality is that archaeology often serves political ends as much as scientific ones. Religion, too, influences what is accepted and what is rejected. Stories of antediluvian civilizations, worlds destroyed by floods thousands of years before the biblical narrative of Noah, conflict with certain traditional interpretations of sacred texts. To admit the possibility of advanced cultures long before the accepted biblical timeline unsettles those who view Scripture as literal history. In such cases, evidence is not just inconvenient, but heretical. Forbidden archaeology thrives in these gaps, where belief systems collide with discoveries too ambiguous to be neatly categorized. One of the most compelling aspects of forbidden archaeology is the testimony of divers and local people who claim to have seen what the official record ignores. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar scans revealed geometric patterns deep below the waves, structures resembling pyramids and avenues. Initial reports sparked headlines, but follow-up studies were sparse, and the story faded. Independent divers continue to insist that the site contains artificial formations, but without institutional backing, their voices remain on the fringes. Off Japan, at Yonaguni, divers point to symbols carved into stone and features resembling staircases. Geologists dismiss them as natural fractures. The truth may lie somewhere in between, but the refusal to engage seriously with the evidence feeds the sense of suppression. Even within documented archaeology, anomalies abound. Stone tools found in layers older than expected, bones showing signs of human modification long before humans were thought to be present, maps from the early modern period depicting coastlines as they might have appeared during the Ice Age. These fragments are often filed under out-of-place artifacts. Each on its own can be dismissed, but together they suggest that history is not as tidy as we want it to be. Forbidden archaeology is less about one smoking gun and more about a pattern of dissonance, a series of small cracks in the grand narrative. It is easy to dismiss these ideas as conspiracy. After all, not every stone is a monument, not every story is historical fact, and not every suppressed artifact is evidence of a cover-up. Yet, the allure of forbidden archaeology persists because it points to something we all know instinctively: the past is larger than the present can contain. For every ruin unearthed, countless others remain buried. For every story recorded, countless others have been forgotten. The ocean, with its vast depths and relentless tides, is the greatest keeper of these secrets. When divers bring back fragments that challenge the timeline, perhaps the real problem is not suppression, but the limits of what we are willing to imagine. What makes this subject so captivating is not only the discoveries themselves, but the silence that surrounds them. Silence, after all, is fertile ground for imagination. If the Gulf of Khumbat's artifacts are real, why were they not studied further? If Cuba's underwater pyramids are natural, why did the story vanish without thorough investigation? If Yonaguni is geological, why do so many divers insist otherwise? The lack of resolution is what makes these sites forbidden. They are not written into the official story, yet they refuse to disappear. As the documentary lens drifts through archives of forgotten photographs, dusty shelves of artifacts, and silent underwater ruins, one message becomes clear: the history we are taught is not the whole story. Not because scholars are malicious, but because history is fragile, and our interpretations are limited by what we allow ourselves to see. Forbidden archaeology is less a conspiracy and more a mirror, reflecting back our own discomfort with uncertainty, our fear of rewriting the past, and our deep suspicion that what lies beneath the waves may change everything we think we know. The sea keeps its secrets well. Divers glimpse them, locals whisper of them, and scholars debate them. But the greatest mystery is not what has been lost, but why we are so reluctant to find it. Perhaps the truth is simple: to accept that civilizations rose and fell long before our accepted timelines is to accept that our own world, too, could vanish just as swiftly. To acknowledge the forbidden past is to confront the fragility of the present. When we imagine the drowned cities of the past, it is tempting to see only the ruins, the silent columns, the toppled statues, the stone roads now traversed by fish. But these were not always ghostly places. They were once alive with sound, color, and scent. To understand the true scale of what was lost when the seas rose, we must look beyond the stone and into the lives of the people who built them. What was it like to wake each morning in a city that now lies underwater? What rhythms of trade, ritual, and family life pulsed through those avenues before the ocean swallowed them whole? Reconstructing everyday life before the floods is to breathe air back into these ruins, to remember that behind each stone was a human story. Take Pavlopetri, the sunken Greek city. 5,000 years ago, it was not a curiosity for divers but a thriving coastal town. Families lived in small stone houses, their courtyards filled with pots of herbs. Fishermen mended their nets in the early morning, preparing to cast them in the shallow bay. Women carried water from wells, their hands stained with the pigments of clay pots they shaped and fired. Children chased each other through narrow streets that still remain etched on the seabed. The sea that would one day reclaim the town was, in that time, its provider, filling markets with fish, carrying traders from distant islands, and connecting villagers to the larger Mediterranean world. To swim through Pavlopetri today is to trace those steps in silence, to imagine the voices that once filled its plazas. In Egypt's Heracleion, life would have been far grander. As a bustling port city at the mouth of the Nile, its harbors would have been filled with ships, sleek wooden vessels laden with grain, spices, and gold. Merchants shouted across docks, priests performed rituals in towering temples, and processions of devotees carried offerings to the gods. The city was a living crossroads, where Greeks, Egyptians, and travelers from beyond exchanged not only goods but ideas. Statues of gods gleamed in the sunlight, markets overflowed with perfumes and textiles, and festivals brought thousands into the streets. To see Heracleion today, submerged in murky silence, is to confront a chilling contrast. What was once a city of sound and light has become a mausoleum of stone. Yet the layout of its harbors and temples still whispers of the grandeur that was ordinary life. Baiae in Italy offers a different glimpse, one of decadence. For Rome's elite, life here was a dream of indulgence. Villas perched along the bay, adorned with mosaics depicting mythological scenes, their courtyards echoing with music and laughter. Roman senators and emperors retreated here to escape politics, to feast, to scheme, and to enjoy the pleasures of warm mineral baths. Slaves carried trays of wine, while poets recited verses beside marble fountains. The air was thick with incense, roasted meats, and gossip. To the Romans, Baiae was a paradise of leisure. Yet beneath that luxury simmered danger, for the very volcanic forces that fed its hot springs were shifting the earth. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the land sank, taking villas and mosaics down into the sea. Today, divers glide over those same mosaics, their patterns distorted by rippling light, a ghostly echo of laughter that has long since faded. In the Indian Ocean, everyday life in the supposed drowned settlements would have been equally vivid. The Gulf of Kumbat, if indeed it held a city, might have been a hub of early trade. Fishermen cast nets into shallow waters, while traders loaded boats with beads, shells, and spices to exchange with distant lands. Temples rose above busy streets, and rituals connected the people to gods they believed controlled the sea. For them, the ocean was not an enemy but an ally, a highway that connected them to the wider world. They could not know that one day, the same ocean would turn against them. When the waters finally rose, they would have watched in horror as the tide swallowed their homes, their temples, and their memory. That trauma, perhaps, became myth, preserved as stories of floods and vanished continents. Atlit Yam, the Neolithic village off Israel's coast, paints perhaps the most intimate picture of all. 7,000 years ago, families farmed small plots of land, herded animals, and fished in nearby waters. They built stone houses and dug wells for fresh water. In the center of their village, they raised a circle of megaliths, perhaps for rituals or gatherings. They buried their dead with care, one skeleton even showing evidence of disease, a reminder that these people lived and died with the same struggles we know today. When the sea rose and took Atlit Yam, it did not erase nameless ruins but the lives of farmers, parents, and children. Today, their bones lie beneath the waves, their silent witness a reminder that progress is fragile. What unites all these drowned worlds is their ordinariness. They were not utopias of impossible technology or cities of gods, they were human settlements filled with the hum of daily life. The myths and legends may exaggerate, transforming floods into divine punishments, but the ruins themselves tell a quieter story, of meals cooked, markets haggled in, prayers whispered, and lives lived with dignity. That is what makes their loss so haunting. When we walk through the ruins of Pompeii, preserved in ash, we glimpse a frozen moment of Roman life. But the drowned cities offer a different kind of preservation, not of the moment, but of absence, of void. The sea does not freeze time, it erases it, leaving only fragments for us to imagine. To reconstruct these lives is to confront not only the past but our own vulnerability. Just as Pavlopetri thrived on the sea that eventually destroyed it, so too do modern coastal cities depend on the ocean for trade, food, and connection. The bustling ports of today, New York, Mumbai, Shanghai, are reflections of Heracleion, Baiae, and Atlantis. And like them, they are vulnerable. Rising seas threaten to submerge neighborhoods, while storms grow fiercer with each passing year. To look at the drowned cities of the past is to see our own reflection, distorted but undeniable, in the waters of history. As the camera lingers on fish swimming through ancient doorways, on mosaics shimmering beneath ripples, on temples toppled in slow motion by centuries of tide, one realization comes sharply into focus: these places were not lost because they were weak, but because the sea is relentless. Their everyday lives remind us that civilizations are not defined only by their triumphs, but by their fragility. The ocean remembers what we forget. It remembers the footsteps, the laughter, the prayers, and the silence that follows. And as long as their ruins lie beneath the waves, they continue to whisper that story back to us, daring us to listen. The drowned cities of the past are not just stories of what has been lost, they are also warnings. To study them is to realize that the forces which swallowed Pavlopetri, Heracleion, or Atlantis are not ancient anomalies but recurring realities. The ocean has always been rising, shifting, consuming, and it will continue to do so. When we look at submerged ruins, we are not gazing at a closed chapter, but at a mirror reflecting our own uncertain future. The science of climate, the memory of the Ice Age, and the looming threat of modern sea level rise connect our fate directly to those who watched their worlds vanish thousands of years ago. At the end of the last Ice Age, around 20,000 years ago, sea levels were over 100 meters lower than they are today. Vast plains connected islands to continents, and coastlines stretched far beyond what we now recognize. These were fertile places, perfect for settlement, fishing, and trade. It is no wonder that early humans built their first communities along these now vanished shores. But when the Great Melt began, everything changed. Between 12,000 and 7,000 years ago, glaciers retreated, oceans surged, and sea levels rose at terrifying speeds. In some places, the water crept up slowly over centuries, forcing generations to retreat inland. In other places, sudden surges, fueled by collapsing ice sheets and massive floods, erased entire regions in a single lifetime. To live in that age was to live in constant uncertainty, never knowing if the land beneath your feet would remain tomorrow. Modern science has revealed just how dramatic these shifts were. Geologists speak of events like the Meltwater Pulse 1A, a period around 14,600 years ago when sea levels may have risen by as much as 20 meters in only 5 centuries. Imagine what that meant for coastal communities. Towns carefully built near rivers and harbors would have been drowned within a few generations. Oral traditions of great floods begin to make sense against this backdrop. They were not exaggerations, but cultural memories of real catastrophes. Archaeology shows us the ruins, science shows us the rising seas that erased them. Together, they remind us that the ocean's advance is relentless and cyclical. And now, in the 21st century, we are witnessing a new surge. The glaciers of Greenland and Antarctica are melting, the oceans are warming and expanding, and storms are growing more destructive. The numbers are stark. Scientists warn that sea levels could rise by 1 meter or more within the next century. That may not sound catastrophic, but it would mean the flooding of entire coastal cities, the loss of millions of homes, and the displacement of hundreds of millions of people. Low-lying nations like the Maldives or Tuvalu may vanish entirely. Coastal megacities like Miami, Shanghai, Mumbai, and Jakarta face the same fate as Heracleion and Baiae, prosperous centers slowly yielding to the sea. What we see in the ruins of the past is not myth but preview. The parallel is unsettling. Just as Heracleon's bustling markets and temples slipped beneath the Nile Delta, so too might New York's skyscrapers or Venice's canals. Just as Pavlopetri streets are now crossed by fish, so too might the streets of coastal towns one day echo only with silence. To stand in front of a drowned ruin is to look at our possible future, a future in which the sea is once again the great eraser. Unlike our ancestors, however, we know what is coming. We can measure the ice as it melts, we can track the tides as they creep higher each year. And yet, our ability to act remains uncertain. History tells us that civilizations fall not only from sudden catastrophe but from slow erosion, the gradual failure to respond until it is too late. Technology offers us new ways to confront both the past and the future. Tools like sonar mapping, LiDAR, and satellite imaging are uncovering submerged worlds in ways that would have been impossible even decades ago. Entire landscapes hidden beneath the ocean floor are being revealed, river valleys, stone structures, even ancient shorelines now invisible to the human eye. These tools are not just rewriting history, they are also helping us predict the future. By studying how seas rose in the past, scientists can model how they might rise again, and what will be lost. The same instruments that map Pavlopetri streets beneath the waves can map the vulnerable coastlines of Bangladesh or Florida, showing us where today's people may be forced to abandon their homes. The lesson, however, is not purely scientific. It is emotional. Ancient myths of floods were never just warnings of water, they were lessons in humility. They reminded people that no matter how powerful a city or empire becomes, it is never greater than the sea. Our modern skyscrapers, our networks of satellites, our global trade routes, these too can be undone. The forbidden history of lost cities is not simply about secrets buried by the ocean, it is about the arrogance of forgetting that we are still at its mercy. To see Heracleion lying silent beneath the Nile is to imagine our own cities in ruin, the artifacts of our age someday puzzling future divers. But there is also hope in this perspective. If we recognize that civilizations before us endured such losses and yet humanity continued, then perhaps we can face our own challenges with resilience. Ancient survivors of floods carried their stories into myth, embedding warnings for the future. Today, we have not only myth but science, giving us clearer visions of what lies ahead. The challenge is not whether we can know, but whether we will act. If we fail, the ruins of tomorrow will join the ruins of yesterday beneath the waves. As the lens drifts across satellite images of modern coastlines, then cuts to footage of submerged ruins shimmering in the deep, the connection becomes undeniable. The sea has always been both cradle and destroyer. It nurtured early trade and settlement, but it also reclaimed what it gave. It preserved myths of floods and erased empires from memory. And now, it waits again, advancing inch by inch, tide by tide. The cities of the past are not just curiosities for divers, they are warnings written in stone, a message from across millennia that the ocean never forgets. Every myth begins as a story, and every story begins with a memory. But somewhere along the way, the line between memory and imagination blurs, and what was once lived becomes legend. In the case of lost cities and great floods, that line is thinner than we might think. For centuries, scholars have debated whether the tales of Atlantis, Kumarikandam, or golden kingdoms beneath Lake Titicaca are pure invention or distorted echoes of real events. The truth may not lie at either extreme, but in the uneasy space between. Myths may not be history in the strict sense, but they are rarely invented out of nothing. Instead, they preserve fragments of experience, refracted through generations of storytelling until fact and fiction are inseparable. Consider the flood myths that ripple across nearly every culture. In Mesopotamia, the gods drowned the world but saved Utnapishtim in a great boat. In India, Vishnu warned Manu of the waters and guided him to safety. In the Americas, tribes spoke of rivers rising to swallow villages whole. These stories are often dismissed as allegory, tales of divine punishment or symbolic rebirth. Yet the sheer consistency of their detail suggests they are something more. Could they be distorted memories of real floods, carried across centuries in oral tradition? If so, then myth is not the opposite of history but its shadow, an imperfect record that refuses to die even when stone cities sink into silence. The same tension surrounds Atlantis. To some, it is a moral parable crafted by Plato, to others, it is proof of a forgotten civilization. But perhaps both are true. Plato may have adapted real fragments of memory, stories of drowned coasts passed down from Egyptian priests, into his allegory of hubris. Over time, his account became a seed for endless speculation, amplified by explorers, mystics, and dreamers. Was Atlantis a literal city? Maybe not. But was it born from memories of real cities lost to the sea, preserved in fragments of oral history? That possibility is harder to dismiss. Myth, in this sense, is not fabrication but preservation, a fragile vessel carrying truth across centuries of change. The myths of Asia and the Pacific illustrate this pattern as well. In Okinawa, legends speak of kingdoms punished by the sea. In Tamil traditions, the lost land of Kumari Kandam is remembered as a cradle of civilization drowned by rising waters. In Micronesia, Nan Madol is tied to tales of sorcerers levitating stones. Are these mere flights of imagination, or were they inspired by real catastrophes, tsunamis, floods, earthquakes, that erased settlements from the landscape? When a community loses its city overnight, it may lack the tools to explain tectonics or sea level rise. Instead, it encodes the trauma into myth, framing it as the will of gods or spirits. The story survives not because it is literally true, but because it captures the essence of what was experienced: sudden loss, irreversible change, and the power of the sea. This interplay between myth and memory complicates the way we approach archaeology. When divers find submerged ruins, local legends often describe them long before scientists take notice. Fishermen in India spoke of drowned temples centuries before sonar confirmed their presence. Villagers around Lake Titicaca told stories of ruins beneath the water long before divers explored them. Indigenous Amazonian tribes described vast lost cities that Western explorers mocked as fantasy, only for LiDAR to reveal massive networks hidden under the jungle canopy. Again and again, myth proves to be a repository of knowledge, coded in symbols but grounded in lived reality. To dismiss it outright is to ignore the voices of the past. To take it literally is to distort it. The truth lies in careful listening, in recognizing that memory can survive in metaphor. And yet, the persistence of myth also speaks to something deeper: the human need to explain. We do not accept silence easily. When a city disappears, when an empire falls, when a coastline vanishes beneath the sea, we demand reasons. Sometimes those reasons become moral lessons: cities destroyed for their pride or sins. Sometimes they become cosmological stories, gods cleansing the world to start anew. In every case, myth fills the void left by absence. It is a way of keeping alive what would otherwise be lost completely. The drowned cities we uncover today are not just ruins, they are confirmations that myths, however distorted, were rooted in something real. Modern science and myth seem opposed, but in truth, they are allies. Science gives us data: ice cores, sonar maps, geological surveys. Myth gives us human perspective: fear, awe, grief, and survival. Together, they tell a fuller story. Science can show us that sea levels rose dramatically after the Ice Age. Myth tells us how it felt for those who watched their homes vanish. Science can measure the collapse of coastlines. Myth remembers it as the wrath of gods. Neither alone is enough. To bridge the gap between myth and memory is to honor both reason and imagination, to recognize that history is not only recorded in stone and ink but in stories whispered around fires and carried across generations. What makes this line between myth and memory so important is what it tells us about ourselves. We, too, are telling stories, of rising seas, of vanishing coastlines, of uncertain futures. Perhaps one day, our descendants will remember New York or Venice not through precise climate data but through legends of cities swallowed by the ocean. Perhaps they will remember them as cautionary tales, as we remember Atlantis. The cycle continues: memory becomes myth, myth becomes history, and history becomes lesson. As the camera glides from ancient ruins to modern skylines glittering along fragile coastlines, the connection becomes undeniable. The myths of the past are not quaint fantasies but echoes of lived reality. They are reminders that civilizations rise and fall, that seas advance and retreat, and that what seems eternal is always fragile. To dismiss myth is to dismiss memory, to embrace it too literally is to lose history. The truth lies between, in the thin line where memory endures through story, and story keeps alive what stone alone could not.